Hey, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Over the last days and weeks, the talk about the federal deficit, raising the debt ceiling, and all the machinations within Congress and the executive branch made me think about another time in history when the government was in serious trouble regarding money. And that was, you guessed it, the Civil War. The expense to pay for all of the weapons and other items connected to the war, all the materials, was crazy expensive, racking up a debt in the billions of dollars. And this is in 1861 to $65. And the government needed to come up with ways, and sometimes creative ways, to be able to begin paying down that debt. A number of actions and moves were put in place by the government. And in 1864, one of those acts was what is known today as the sun tax. In fact, it was known back then as the sun tax. And this was a direct tax on photographs. And when I say direct, I mean affixing an internal revenue service stamp on photographs. This, of course, was not particularly popular with a lot of folks, especially the photographers. And it took place, it was enacted in August of 1864. And over the months and a year that followed, the outrage and upsetment on behalf of 20,000 photographers in the United States just went from bad to worse. By early 1866, they had had enough. Taking a quick pause here, Military Images Magazine a couple years ago, we did a great story on this, and the author was Rick Lessingring, who's a fantastic historian. I won't go into all the details about the beginning of the tax, but I do want to touch on how the tax finally ended, how the sun finally set on the sun tax. So, picking up the story, in 1866, by early 1866, photographers had enough. A full-fledged rebellion against the sun tax began, and it came in the form of petitions that were sent to Congress from various cities and regions across the United States. By February 14th of 1866, a delegation of photographers had arrived in the Capitol representing various places around the country. Some of the names of that delegation are going to be well known to you. Matthew Brady and Alexander Gardner, they joined forces to represent the Washington, D.C. and the Mid-Atlantic area. Up in Baltimore, the Bendan brothers, David and Daniel, and another photographer named Palmer L. Perkins represented their interests. In Philadelphia, Edward Wilson and Washington German stood up and headed up the rallying cry for Pennsylvania photographers. In New York, Charles Fredericks and Benjamin Gurney carried the torch for photographers. And in Boston, George Loomis and Samuel Massary acted on behalf of New England's interests. So they ultimately came up with a multi-point plan that they put in front of Congress. And they argued the following: that they wanted to repeal this tax on aesthetic grounds, arguing that stamps marred the photographs. They're just ugly to see attached to photographs. They mentioned that when you hand canceled those stamps, or used a stamp to cancel the stamps, the bleeding of the ink would cause problems. Affixing the stamps to photographs made the photographs thicker and more expensive to mail, adding an additional burden to the sender. Third-party dealers in photographs, bookstores, general stores, places like that, they had trouble separating photographs from lithographs, and that caused them to spend more time, only adding to their costs sort of soft costs. And then last but not least, the additional handling of photographs to put the stamps by photographers or their assistants. That created problems because you introduced more places to cause disfiguring marks or scuffs to the photographs. So none of this was good news for the photographic industry. And they eventually found a champion in Congress. His name is Leonard Myers. He's from Pennsylvania. And I want to show you his photograph to give you a sense of what his likeness was. He stood up eventually in front of the House of Representatives on May 18th, 1866, and he launched into a speech arguing on behalf of those thousands of photographers across the country. They were already burdened by the cost, the inflation that had affected them, causing the prices of supplies to rise by 250% during the war. They could not afford to carry this additional burden. Myers pointed that out. And then he said, quote, "These photographs are really works of art and ought to be exempted from taxation." He continued, "It is absolutely an advantage that we should do away with stamps upon photographs, both for the protection of the interest of the public and the interest of the photographers. Every gentleman in this house who has had photographs taken or who has examined them knows that the canceling of the stamps also tends to deface the photographs when they are packed together in a case or otherwise." And then he added with feeling, holding some images up, quote, I will not deny the beauty of my children, but I must say that I do not like to have their photographs defaced by ink marks, which have been transferred to the face of the picture, as in the case with a photograph which I now have before me. The debate raged for another full day. Finally, when it was all over, Myers won and the tax was repealed on August 1st of 1866. The Philadelphia Photographer, which was the industry newspaper, the industry magazine for the photo industry, proclaimed Myers something of a hero and proclaimed victory. And victory was also shared by those delegates, by Matthew Brady, Gardner, the Bendan brothers, and those other men from around the country who represented the 20,000 photographers. And here's a little bit of a sidelight. In the Philadelphia Photographer, they noted that they received 2 copies of a photograph of the delegates who posed for their victory portrait. I've never seen any of those 2 prints reproduced anywhere. And to the best of my knowledge, they're lost. I suspect they're out there somewhere. Could use your help in trying to find them. So if you see 8 photographers, including Matthew Brady, taken in 1866, let me know. Until then.